that IT degree served us really well. Okay. Good morning. I'm Chris Westover. I'm the president at Mountain Empire Community College, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 44th Annual John Fox Jr. Literary Festival. It's also a pleasure for MECC and the MECC Foundation to host New York Times best-selling author Silas House. And before we begin, I want to make sure that I extend our sincere appreciation to those who've helped organize this event. So first, I want to thank the MECC Foundation staff and the MECC Foundation Cultural and Humanities Committee, chaired by Mrs. Virginia Metter, for planning today's program. Thank you all. Second, I'd like to thank the Lonesome Pine Regional Library for their active involvement and sponsorship of this year's event. Thank you to all of you who were involved. I'd also like to thank the Lonesome Pine Arts and Crafts Organization and its members for sponsoring our literary contest. Lonesome Pine Arts and Crafts has been an event sponsor since the inception of this amazing festival, and we're grateful for their continued annual support of the prizes for our contest winners. We also want to thank the Fox House ladies and the John Fox Jr. Home and Museum in preparing our wonderful luncheon that will follow this event. And if you have not visited the Fox House, you are in for a treat. And those rolls, boy, I like those rolls. I also must take a moment to recognize our Origins project, launched by Big Stone Gap native and author Adriana Trigiani, and our Origin Project Steering Committee, which have worked diligently to promote and preserve our region's rich history by encouraging our area youth to write about the stories of their family history. And Mary Trigiani recently gave me all of the volumes, and they are wonderful. I so enjoy reading them. The Origins Project has been a wonderful partner in encouraging more creative writing in our region. And if there are any Origin Project volunteers who may be with us today, I want to make sure that I thank you all for your work in strengthening the writing skills of our local students. So thank you. And most of all, I want to thank and congratulate our students and individuals who submitted entries to our short story and poetry contests. All of them are winners, and we had some amazing entries this year. At the end of the program, we'll recognize short story and poetry contest winners, and while this is a time to celebrate the achievements of our area students, we should also celebrate the accomplishments of our local teachers, who dedicate their lives to providing the instruction, encouragement, and enabling our students to become proficient writers. Congratulations, and thank you to the many teachers who have helped today's winners be successful. So at your seats, you'll see you have copies of each of the winning entries to our short story and poetry contests. Please feel free to take a copy with you as you go, and if you would like additional copies, we can certainly provide them for you. And at this time, I'm going to ask Dr. Amy Greer, MECC's Vice President for Institutional Advancement, to introduce our speaker.
Good morning, everyone. I can't tell you how pleased I am to welcome this morning's guest, Mr. Silas House. Silas House is the New York Times best-selling author of I need to move that away because it's moving it, of 6 novels, including his first, Clay's Quilt, in 2001, now considered a foundational text in Appalachian literature, and his most recent, Southernmost, from 2018, which was long listed for the Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction and won awards including the Weatherford Prize for Fiction. House is a member of the Fellowship of Southern Writers and a former commentator for NPR's All Things Considered. His writing appears frequently in the New York Times and Salon and has been published in Time, Ecotone, Garden and Gun, Oxford American, and many other places. House is a native of Eastern Kentucky and teaches at Berea College and in the Spalding School of Writing. And now that I have the formal introduction, I will give you the Amy Greer introduction to the personal one. When Mr. House called me several days ago to make arrangements for today's visit, I have to admit I had a fangirl moment. And hope you all can sympathize with me a little bit. His name popped up on my phone, and I was like, oh my God. It could have been Mick Jagger, and it would have just been the same level of excitement. I could barely speak. So because I have admired his work for so long, I first saw him, and I'm embarrassed to admit this, but that's okay, in 2007 with my husband at a rock concert in Knoxville, and he actually introduced the band. But he spoke, they had him speak about Appalachian culture and preserving our mountains and our natural resources in the area. And I was just enamored. I had to run out and buy his books, which I've read most of them. So you see, to me, Silas House speaks my language. He is like me, and he makes it okay for me to be me, meaning that my accent is okay. And I hope you all feel the same way. So I can't think of a more fitting guest speaker to celebrate our region's literary and cultural history, Mr. Silas House. Welcome.
Good morning. Can you hear me all right back there in the back, everybody? Well, I sure thank you all for being here this morning. Sorry, it'll take me a minute to get all my everything situated. I'm always glad to be in Big Stone Gap and in Southwest Virginia. If not for Southwest Virginia, I probably wouldn't be a writer, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. But and to be in the hometown of one of my dearest friends, Adriana Trigiani, who's making such a difference in the world and is such a great representative of Appalachia. I'm honored to be in her hometown. I'm thankful to President Westover and Amy Greer and everyone who's responsible for inviting me here to be here today. I'm honored to be a part of the John Fox Jr. Remembrance. He's a writer that I teach in my Appalachian Lit class, and was probably the first Appalachian writer to really gain an international audience. Certainly the first Appalachian writer to be a huge bestseller and to be a national phenomenon. I thought it might be good this morning to tell you a little bit about my path to becoming a writer, and why I believe that matters doubly to someone who is rural, someone who was raised working class, someone who's really proud of being Appalachian, and like Amy referenced, somebody who talks the way I talk. So I'll tell you why I think all that is important here in a few minutes. So I'll talk about that for about 35, 40 minutes or so, and then I'll turn it over to you. I'm going to read just a little bit from my first book, and then I'll turn it over to you. So I hope you'll have some questions so we can have a conversation. When I'm out in the world, that's I really want to do is talk to people and have a conversation. So ask me some questions, please. If you don't, I'll feel really uninteresting. But to launch into it, throughout I'll be showing you some pictures from my life. I was born in Whitley County, Kentucky, and that's not far from Cumberland Falls, which you see here. And it's one of the places I think everyone should see. I'm really proud to be from the county where that is. How many of you have been to Cumberland Falls? Not enough of you. So I hope you will go. You can go to Cumberland Falls, and then you can go see where the first Kentucky Fried Chicken is, because it's right down the road. And you can eat at the Wrigley Tap Room, which is a really great restaurant in Corbin. And I could give you a whole tour guide of that if you want to later, tell you all the things to do in Whitley County. But I grew up for my first 8 years in a trailer on Robinson Creek in the little town of Lilly that sits snugly between the Laurel River and the Wilderness Road. I have lived my whole life near the Wilderness Road until just recently. My parents were crazy about each other, and they worked like dogs all the time. They're still crazy about each other, and they still work like dogs now that they're in their mid-70s. My father was a Vietnam vet who worked as a mechanic at the Shell station in London, Kentucky, and later took a job at Certainty, the factory where he breathed in the grit of fiberglass all throughout his third shift nights. On the side, he also poured concrete. My mother worked as the elementary school cafeteria, in the elementary school cafeteria as a cook and later as the cashier. She also sometimes sewed home interior or Tupperware. They had both lived in extreme poverty as children, and they wanted to make sure that I never did. The number one thing my parent taught me was to love really hard, and the second thing they taught me was most important was to work really hard. By the time I was 8, they had worked and saved enough to buy a small house in the valley between Robinson Creek and Slate Ridge. It had 3 little bedrooms and 3 pink dogwoods in the front porch, so we thought we had made it. We had made it into the middle class, even if it was the lower middle class. And although it was not perfect, just as no childhood and no family is, I did have a wonderful childhood, full of family and community. We went to church every time the door was cracked, which would be somewhat problematic for me, but also foundational. We ate at a different family member's house, or they came to our house every other night. It was a constant revolving door of people coming in and out all the time. I was always with a big group of cousins who were more like siblings. We sat on the porches together. We talked all the time. We played in the woods. We played in the creek. We ice skated on the river even though we weren't supposed to, etc. From the time I was very little, I realized the power of words and music. I have always lived on stories, and my people knew how to tell them. They exaggerated, embellished, added in new scenes with each telling like the best storytellers do. I was raised in a family that had been so poverty-stricken that they didn't have much more than their stories, and so they took their storytelling very seriously. When words are all you have, you learn to cherish them. You learn to roll them about on the palm of your hand and admire their beauty, their shine. And in my family, in my place in the world, we knew that words could be used to fight back. On the rare occasion when we left the region and people made fun of the way we talked, we knew how to defend ourselves by either telling them off or using our mountain charm to disarm them. But mostly words were used for the positive, to praise, to soothe, to heal. The very act of collecting words in a beautiful way and then delivering them to others was a kind of praise service. The words were being worshipped. We were a storytelling people, and we knew that stories are the things that sustain a people and a place. They're the first roots of community. My Granny May told me stories while she hoed the corn and beans. I was the only grandchild that wanted to be out there with her because I wanted to hear her stories. Or while she sat in her green rocker and swatted flies without missing a beat. My father talked from underneath the hood of a car, emerging with blackened, greasy arms long enough to finish the story. All of my good uncles, Bobby, Lonnie, Red, Ray, Sam, Jack, they would stand in a row, laugh about their honky-tonk days. My preacher uncles, Snook and Walter, always stood apart, and they would talk low and serious about church. All they ever talked about was church. My girl cousins, Dina, Tina, Gina, sat on the creek bank with their feet in the rushing waters of Laurel Fork, confiding in one another. My cousins Melanie and Barb, neither one of them hardly took a breath while they related some epic that had happened at school that day. My best friend Donna made up things as she went along, adding in twists and turns whenever the notion struck her. If something exciting hadn't happened that day, Donna would make it up that it had happened. My Uncle Dave recited poems and sang little made-up songs. There were my aunts and mother in the kitchen, washing dishes, stories curving in and out and overtop one another, all of them somehow making sense at the same time. A good song would come on the radio, and my mother and sister would dance and sing. This is my favorite memory from childhood. For the juicier stories, I would disappear into the shadowy corners of the living room. I'd crawl up under the kitchen table or the high front porch. At my granny's, I would get under the quilting rack. I would do anything to eavesdrop. I was a glutton for secrets, like any good writer is. And my family had plenty of secrets and plenty of stories. Even then, I knew how lucky I was to grow up in that world, to be surrounded by people who talked all the time, who told tales, who laughed so loudly, who still knew the art of communication, and thereby they knew the art of community. This is not to say that it was as romantic or as perfect as it might sound. Growing up in such a close-knit culture can be smothering too, and I often felt suffocated and spied upon. Nothing escaped the eyes and ears of these people, and sometimes, like I said, if they didn't know for sure, they'd just make it up as a fact. A near monthly occurrence in our community was that one of our neighbors would throw all of her husband's clothes off the porch as they screamed at each other, and we all watched. One time she lit them on fire, and my best friend Donna and I stopped on our bicycles in the road and watched as she stood there. She was magnificent, with the orange glow lighting her smiling face. There was also poverty, but at the time I had no idea that most of the people I knew were poor. We all had plenty to eat, so it didn't matter, and nothing else mattered. Almost everyone I knew and was kin to lived in trailers, but I didn't know for a while that people not only looked down upon us for that reason, some people actively hated us for living in trailers, and they still do. When I was in 7th grade, a pivotal thing happened to me. That year, I had a teacher who changed my life in many ways. She has remained my favorite teacher. Her name is Sandra Stidham, and I say her name everywhere I go and hold her up as a public school teacher. At that time, literature was not considered very seriously by the Department of Education in Kentucky, and Miss Stidham felt that by 7th grade, she should correct that curriculum, even if the local school board disagreed with her. So she brought in her own books and set up a little lending library that was transformative for me and many others. There I found the first books that would truly inspire and change me. Most of all, she solidified me as a reader and an artist because she was so passionate about literature. I had never met anyone who loved the written word so much. She would read entire Edna St. Vincent Millay or Wordsworth poems to us with tears running down her face, unashamed. This made it okay for me to be as moved by literature. This gave me permission to be passionate about it too, even though lots of my peers were giggling at her behind their grubby little hands. Then one day, she wrote a quote by Eleanor Roosevelt on the blackboard. "No one can make you feel inferior without your own consent." I had already been taught this in other ways by my family, but seeing it spelled out in Miss Stidham's neat, hunched-back cursive on the blackboard, seeing it written down in words, solidified it for me in a new way. Since I wanted to be a writer, since my idols were John Boy Walton and Harper Lee, when all the other little boys idolized Evel Knievel and Larry Bird, I knew the negative power of words too. When the other boys played football, I laid against a tree and read The Outsiders, Where the Red Fern Grows, Where the Lilies Bloom. While they followed their father's leads to be racist, even though we didn't know anybody who wasn't exactly like us, I teared up while I read To Kill a Mockingbird and realized that there were lots of different kinds of people in the world. Books saved me over and over, books and poetry and music, and I wasn't ashamed of it either. I became a young artist who announced himself in class as such. By the age of 12, I began to identify as a writer. This didn't go over well with those snarling boys and a few of the more scoffing girls, so they called me names. Since I was scrawny and they all seemed gigantic, I could only fight back so much. So I fought back in my little black and white composition book. In my notebook, I could write anything I wanted to about them, and my anger would sizzle down my arms and out the tips of my fingers like light. The frustration becoming sentences that became paragraphs, that became scenes, and then I had created something. And the act of creation is a really powerful thing. I began to write as if my life depended on it. If you doubt the time period, you can just look in the background there at the home interior on the wall, and I don't know if you can make out that wall has also been a feather duster has been dipped in paint, and then it's been made to look like wallpaper. Do y'all remember when people did that? So this was my first electric typewriter, and I loved it. It was all I ever did. I set my sights on being a writer, and I was very lucky along the way to have people that encouraged me. My parents, who had worked so hard, were scared by the thoughts of me becoming a writer because they didn't know how I might make a living at that. But nonetheless, they encouraged me, and they never tried to divert me from what I wanted. And often people question me about that when I'm out in the world. They'll say, it must have been so difficult to have been a writer where you're from, where people don't value literature and the arts and things like that. And the opposite was really true for me. I didn't grow up around a lot of people who read all the time. They weren't literature readers, but they valued literature, and they valued the arts, and they valued education. They knew the importance of it, and they were glad for me to embrace that. And I think that that constant classism is just at play there, and those notions of what it means to come from a rural or working class background. I became the first college graduate in our family. I went to Eastern Kentucky University, and I worked as a cook in a restaurant for the entire 4 years. It always means something to graduate from college to gain higher education, of course. But in my family, this was a hinge in our family story, a paradigm shift that would have an impact on all future members of our family. Little did I know that as much as it would set me on my course as a teacher and writer, that it would also create a divide between me and my family and my community. All my life, I have been taught to not lose my accent. I was told that our language was one of the major threads of our culture, and that instead of being ashamed of it, I should own it. I was determined to always speak with perfect grammar in my native tongue. This is what I tell my students to do. So during and after college, even though the way I talked had not changed, what I talked about did change. Suddenly, my family often accused me of being highfalutin just because of things I had learned in college. In almost any disagreement, the refrain would be, "Oh, you've been to college, you think you know it all." Their own sense of inferiority, taught to them by the media mostly, made them imagine a superiority complex that I honestly did not possess. I have always been in awe of the strength, determination, and keen intelligence of so many people in my family who never had the opportunity to graduate high school, much less go to college. That respect I had for them made me want to get more education, even more. But as a first-generation college student, many of us feel as if we are people with no countries, never feeling as if we have been totally accepted into the world of academia or the literary world, and simultaneously feeling suspect within our own families and cultures. But in the end, their pride in my education and the way they contributed to making that happen overrode everything. They might complain to me about how I thought I knew everything, but privately they would say to people, "He made a teacher," or, "He went to college," etc. Because this is more than a college degree. This is about a family overcoming the many obstacles put before them. It's about people breaking out of the cycle that our system creates in so many different ways, whether it be putting the rights of corporations over those of individuals, the greed of a system run amok, the instant gratification of a country that increasingly values profits over our own environment, even over, mind-bogglingly, our own water supply. For many families trapped within this cycle, education is the way forward. I'm not saying that everyone is cut out for college, because I really don't think they are. We need all kinds of different people to run this world. But I am saying that for many people like me, it has made all the difference, and I'll always be grateful to my whole family, my whole community, my teachers, and my college professors who challenged me and changed me, because I know that getting that degree didn't just change my CV, it also changed me. It made me a better person, a more well-rounded person, a person more capable of fighting back in all the battles that are put before me each day. So I'm proud to be a first-generation college graduate, and I'm also very proud to be a rural person who talks the way I talk. This has been a major part of my work as a writer, not only to capture the way people live and talk in this region, but also to exist in the literary world as a first-generation college graduate, a person who was raised working class, a person who has Appalachia on his tongue. In that world, I am an anomaly. There are not many of us. And I have been punished for those things. The powers that be in the literary world actively hold back rural voices because deep down, many of them still believe that we're all ignorant, racist, homophobic, misogynistic. I encounter that attitude all the time in the publishing industry. In my fourth novel, Eli the Good, I included several letters from a soldier in Vietnam writing home to his wife. The soldier is a rural, working-class man from an unspecified southern state, but it's obviously Kentucky. One of the bigwigs at my publisher insisted that some misspellings and grammatical errors be included in the letters because of the man's background. But I had the last word when I produced the actual letters my father had written to my mother, which I had used verbatim in the book, proving that he had written them without any of the errors that they assumed that he would have. Later on, when I read the audiobook of Eli the Good, half a day of production was shut down while we had a discussion about the way I pronounced this word. Amy Clark is here. She knows all about this. It's a word that is said several times in the book because one of the main characters is a mechanic. The producer of the audiobook was not provincial or superior in tone. He wanted my home language to be preserved, and it was the reason he had chosen me to read the book. However, he feared that some people listening may not be able to understand what I was saying if I read it in my natural way. Or is the way my mouth says that word. And if I interrupt a sentence to make my mouth move in the way that newscaster way of oil is real difficult for me. My palate just doesn't work that way. My mouth doesn't work that way. And so it's unnatural when you're reading a whole sentence to insert that. So we had to work really hard to figure out ways for me to preserve my native way of speaking it, but also making it hearable for the reader. And I don't know exactly how we accomplished that, except that we did it over and over and over again. But I refused to kowtow to that, and I refused to really go into that newscaster speak that would have made it all much more quick. These are things that non-rural writers do not ever have to think about, and often when people hear me speak, they automatically assume I'm stupid. The reason why is because to them my accent is the sound of poverty, and in our world, it is still always okay to negate the poor, whether we want to admit it or not. And that, I think, is the whole reason that our accent is so looked down upon, because to lots of people it sounds like that. Now, I should do a quick disclaimer here and just say that my accent is not the Appalachian accent, and I don't mean to say that. There are many different ways of speaking in Appalachia, and one of those ways of speaking is the newscaster way of speaking, because some people speak that way who are Appalachian. So I don't mean to negate any of that. I'm just saying that because my way of speaking is so often determined to be a country way of speaking, rural Appalachian, people automatically identify me that way by that. And I tell people all the time, this isn't the only way people in Appalachia talk. So when I wrote my first book, these are some of the things I wanted to tackle, some of the things I've been talking about this whole time. That novel is called Clay's Quilt, and it came out in 2001. Here's some of the covers. I started that novel when I was a junior in college. Up until this point, I have been writing about places I didn't really understand. Like I said, I had loved To Kill a Mockingbird, so I said everything in the Deep South for a long time. I had never been further south than Gatlinburg until I was in college. I wrote, what happened then is that I wrote in non-places. My sense of place didn't go beyond the room that a scene was set in, so that they felt like they were happening in vacuums. They were colorless. The reader wasn't able to place herself or feel like she was inhabiting the space, the same space as my characters. In my third year of college, I had a good friend in my math class who loved to read. In that math class, I spent most of my time writing stories, and she spent most of her time reading what I wrote. It's probably why we both failed that class. I about didn't make it through college because of math, and a lot of writers have that same issue. So one time during class, she challenged me to write a story set where I was from, in a small Appalachian community made up of people I was either kin to or felt like were family members. I had never really considered that I could do that, and as soon as she challenged me to do it, I wrote the first line of what would be my first book, and the first line went like this. They were in a car going over Buffalo Mountain, but the man driving was not Clay's father. Now, there are a lot of things I wish I could change about my first book, because the writer always wants to change lots of things about the first book, but I would never change this first line because it's really good. And it's full of two essential things that you need to begin a novel, and that's emotion and mystery. So it makes you want to, hopefully it makes you want to keep reading, and hopefully you know that there's some emotional content going on here. So what works about it the most, though, is that many, many times I had been in a car going over Buffalo Mountain. I knew where I was. I knew the world that I was taking my readers to, and so that changed everything, and it made the writing come alive in a way it never had before. Also, I knew lots of people, mostly my cousins, who were often with some other man besides their fathers, namely their mother's boyfriends or new husbands. So, right away, I was in a world that I knew well. And those two themes go on throughout the book, the issue of men who are good fathers, men who are not good fathers, men who disappear as fathers, and the issue of place. And it's right there in that first line that I just wrote automatically when she gave me that challenge. I knew right away that one thing I really wanted to do was take the reader to the Appalachia that I knew, because most people don't understand Appalachia, although they think they do. I was really stunned when I went to college and began to encounter people from outside the region who had huge misconceptions about the place. They assumed, for example, that I only listened to bluegrass music, when in fact I was at that time in my early 20s mostly listening to records like these. Dwight Yoakam, I guess, being the closest to what they expected. They assumed that I came from a place that didn't value artistry, but everyone I knew encouraged me to be a writer. When those people insulted me, really what I always thought is that they were insulting my family. They assumed I came from a place that was not part of the modern world, but everyone I knew watched MTV and dressed in the latest styles and was very updated on the news. A classmate of mine asked me if I knew who Johnny Carson was one time, when everybody knew who Johnny Carson was. Nowadays, some people might not, but they assumed I came from a place where nobody wore shoes, where I was the only one who could read and write. By the way, I teach at Berea College, and we still have people who come in and ask to see the shoe library, and they honestly ask us that. They think that we have to give our students shoes to go to college. Most troubling to me, they assumed I came from a place that was simple. And as you all know, there is nothing simple about Appalachia. And that's the biggest danger. That's when literature becomes stereotypical, or media period becomes stereotypical, when it simplifies. And that doesn't just mean when it vilifies, that also can mean when it romanticizes. So I wanted to capture Appalachia in a complex way. When I went to find books about my own generation's experience in Appalachia, they just were not there at the time. I had found Appalachian books that I absolutely loved, that really spoke to me. By the time I was in college, I was discovering these books, and they blew my mind. They were so good, and they were about my people. And none of them had as much an impact as the works of Lee Smith. But the problem was that most of them were set in the past. The closest I could come to the contemporary world were the stories of Lee Smith. But even those at the time weren't my generation. It wasn't Generation X. So I just started writing the book that I wanted to read. And although I didn't know it at the time, I wrote the first novel about Generation X, Appalachia. And at least that's what the reviews would tell me later. This is a cover of the reissue of Clay's Quilt that will come out this summer with a new foreword by singer-songwriter Tyler Childers, who says the book was an influence on him as a songwriter. So maybe young people will read it because Tyler Childers tells them to. I don't know. That opening line I read to you earlier is from the prologue, and it's set in the mid-1970s. But the scene I'm going to read to you now, which is the first chapter of the book, was set in the year 2000. And this novel was published in March 2001. So right up until it was going to press, I was trying to make it as contemporary as possible and adding in references from the contemporary news and all that. So I'm just going to read you about 3 pages of it. Clay slid his blackened coveralls down his legs, jerked them off, and tossed the hard clump of clothing into the back of the truck. Coal dust twinkled on the metal of the truck bed. He put his work boots back on and pulled off his T-shirt, sailing it through the window and onto the floorboard. Already his chest was glistening with the sweat of July sun. It was hot and white, and all up the hillsides tangled trumpet vines wilted and thirsted. The blacktop of the parking lot glistened, so soft that it threatened to seep down the hillside. There was only the hint of a breeze, and it felt as forced as the heavy-footed men who made their way out of the coal mine. The men laughed and loudly called out their goodbyes. They climbed into their trucks, ground gears, and set out for home. They told Clay not to get too drunk this weekend, not to get into any fistfights when he went out honky-tonkin'. They loved it that every Monday he told them big tales about barroom brawls and drunken women while the men leaned against the black walls of the earth and took their lunch. They all liked Clay. They called him Baby Boy since he was the youngest man on the crew and everybody had a nickname. They talked with cigarettes bobbing up and down in their mouths, feeling deep in their pockets for their keys. As Clay got into his truck, they all hollered out in sing-song voices, "Bye-bye now, baby boy. Be good this weekend." Clay wheeled his truck carefully down the steep incline of road that led to US 25. Once off the company road and onto the highway, he shifted gears and laid rubber, his tires issuing little barks. He passed 2 of the men who had gotten out before him. He laughed into his rearview mirror at the miners, who gave him the finger and smiled with their teeth blazing white against their dusted faces. He liked the way the ball of the gear shift felt, all cool and shiny, covered up in his fist. He loved the rough purr of the engine and the smooth sound of tires humming sweetly on hot pavement. With one deliberate motion, he clicked a cassette into his player, and Steve Earle started singing, "I Ain't Ever Satisfied." The road was long and curvy, making its way around mountainsides where sandy cliffs dripped sulfur, and parched gullies lay where creeks usually spilled down. Close to the company land, it was heavily wooded with straight white pines and scaly-barked hickories. As Clay passed houses, he could see into the yards where husbands and wives worked side by side in the dusty gardens, hoeing out the weeds. Boys leaned into the mouths of their vehicles, grease smeared up their arms and across their faces, their tools lying silver and shining at their feet. Young wives swept the porch or sat in porch chairs breaking beans. At the Holiness Church, the pastor was standing back to read the message he had just put on the large sign sitting on cinder blocks in the parking lot. It changed every Friday, and Clay loved to see what it would say each week. Today the sign read, "Man is born to trouble, sure as the sparks fly upward." "Amen to that," Clay said aloud. The preacher always knew exactly what to say, as if he predicted Clay's moods. Clay maneuvered the truck around the curves while his fingers tapped on the steering wheel. He sang along without missing a word and felt around on the seat until he found his cigarettes. The Zippo fired, and the scent of new smoke and lighter fluid came to him. On one side of the road, the shoulder dropped off to a kudzu-covered slope that slid down to the river. In some places, the river was so shallow he could make out the small rocks lining its bed. The houses all sat on the other side of the water, with swinging bridges leading out to the shoulder of the road where the people parked. In one of the shoals, a mother in a denim skirt and faded blouse held the hand of her little daughter. They walked in the river, passing under blue shadows of sandbar willows. Their feet looked pink when they came up out of the water. When the woman let go of the child's hand, the little girl fell heavily into the water, and the woman rushed to pick her up. There was always something to remind Clay of his mother. The valley widened out somewhat, and small businesses began to come into sight. He passed a green highway sign that read Black Banks just before he came up the last little hill and stopped at the red light. There was a family-owned grocery store here once, but a huge billboard on the mountain behind it told everyone to shop at the new Walmart Supercenter. A new factory was out on the bypass now, and they were already building another lane on the highway that took travelers up to the Daniel Boone Parkway. A federal courthouse stood just up the street, and on the outskirts of town, all the stores were now moving to both sides of the Walmart. And so, on one hand, I'm trying to make it really contemporary. But on the other hand, reading that now, already in 19 years, things have changed so much. I messed this up. There it is. For one thing, we don't use cassette players anymore, right? So it doesn't feel very contemporary in that way. And another thing is I was noticing that recently back home that almost all the swinging bridges are gone now too, and they've been replaced by concrete bridges, where you can drive over to the house. So those are just a couple things I noticed in that part that are really different. When the book came out, nobody was more surprised than me when it became a New York Times bestseller. 8 months after it was published, I was able to quit my job as a mail carrier and become a full-time writer. And I was thrust out into the world on the book tour, a 35-city book tour, and I was country come to town. I knew nothing. And that was good for me, I guess. Since the book was published, I've published 5 more novels. My most recent one is Southernmost, and it's one I hope you might read. I think they have copies of it today. And so everywhere I go, Southernmost actually took me all over the world, and everywhere I went, I was able to talk about Appalachia, and I hope talk about it in a complex way, and correct people's notions of it that have been perpetuated by other recent books I will not name that you all know. And that'll get worse when the movie of that comes out too. I have always tried to show Appalachia as a complex place. I don't want to romanticize it. I don't want to vilify it. I just want to tell the truth of the one little postage stamp size part of Appalachia that I know. Appalachia is a really diverse place. It's different from holler to holler, from county to county. So there's no way that one writer can, capture Appalachia as a whole. All we can hope to do is to capture the Appalachia we know really well. I'm going to skip over a little bit here so we have time for questions. As I referenced earlier, I do think my career has been held back because I'm thought of as an Appalachian writer, and I'm totally fine with that. There are some big, high-profile gigs that will not call on Appalachian writers. There are some literary circles who think we are inferior. There are some reviewers who will always give a complex portrayal of the region a bad review, and will always give a simplistic portrayal of the region a glowing review. I never really let that bother me much, and I only bring it up because I think it needs to be spoken and said. I think it's important for us all to be reminded of that. And I bring it up because it makes me more defiant to tell the complicated story, to tell the complex story. It solidifies what I was taught my whole life, that we have to fight harder and work harder to be taken seriously. I think that true Appalachian writers are writing because they're trying to understand the place too, because there's nowhere more complicated, more complex, or more interesting to me. So I hope that any of you hopeful emerging writers out there from the region will keep telling its story. When my first book came out, Appalachia needed a Generation X voice. Some of you out there are now considered Generation Z, and we need to hear your stories. We need to keep diversifying the voices of Appalachia as much as we can and show that there's not just one kind of Appalachian any more than there's one kind of Appalachia. That's what I hope to do, and that's what I hope some of you will do. And I hope hearing my story might be a part of empowering you to do that. So thank you. I think we have time for questions, right? Anybody? Yes. That's a good question. You work for years and years to learn the craft, and then you work for years to learn the industry, you know? And I mean, I'm not being facetious. It's just, it's a very long process. And I mean, it depends on how you want to be published. You know, I mean, you can self-publish, you can publish with a smaller press, or you can publish with a bigger house, and all those things take different timelines. But I think if you want to put a really good book into the world, it's going to take lots of time, lots of years. How I did it, very briefly, was the number one thing is to read all the time. It stuns me the amount of students who will take my writing class, and then the very first thing I do is have them list their favorite books, and some of them can't come up with any. And I just want to say, get the hell out, is what I want to say, but I don't. But I encourage them to leave. But it would sort of be like going out for the basketball team. You know, if you've never picked up basketball, it makes no sense. But anyway, read all the time, obviously, right? But then what I did was I tried to educate myself as much as possible, and I went to writing gatherings. I went to any reading I could go to. One of the first readings I ever went to, James Steele and Lee Smith were doing a reading together. And looking back on that now, you know, to know that I was there is pretty incredible. They did a reading together in Hazard, Kentucky, and I just jumped in my car and went. And I learned so much just hearing them talk, you know. And then I went to the Appalachian Writers Workshop at the Hyman Settlement School, and that's a week-long writers workshop. And there I worked with Lee Smith, Sharon McCrum, who's very helpful, Robert Morgan, who's so encouraging. That's the best thing about being an Appalachian writer is, you know, other writers encourage you so much, and they take you under their wing, and we're a real family, you know. And I just went to as much stuff like that as I could, and then I ended up going back and getting a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing as well to just learn more and more and more. I mean, I've published 6 novels now and a book of nonfiction, and which I failed to put on here, but I still learn something all the time. You know, I'm still trying to learn and broaden my education on writing. So, and then the more complicated part is getting an agent and learning all that industry stuff. You know, which artists, it's just not part of us to be business minded, really, for the most part. And you sort of have to teach yourself how to do that. So I'm sorry I can't answer that properly, but that's a real thin sketch. Well, you keep submitting. You know, well, first you write a really good book that's good enough to get an agent to read it. You know, and then you send them 20 pages, and then if they think it's good enough, you finally get them to read it, and then they'll take you on. So, but that's a long process too. Other questions? Yes. Carl. Well, thank you. You too. You've done a whole lot of that. Right. Yes. Thank you for all you've done. Back here. Oh, thank you. Mm. Well, I mean, when I'm reading, now I'm reading from books I wrote 20 years ago, and so they're unfamiliar to me a lot of times. So if I pick one up and read from it, yeah, sometimes I'll cringe, and then sometimes I'm like, that's pretty good. When it's pretty good, I usually don't take too much credit for it because I think a lot of that's just given to you in a way that I don't know how to explain. But I'm glad you mentioned Hillbilly. I wish I'd brought a clip from it, but if any of you have Hulu, you can watch it for free on Hulu. And we won the Best Documentary Prize at the Los Angeles Film Festival and lots of other festivals. And so I'm getting a lot of feedback every day from people who've watched Hillbilly. And it's a real complex portrayal of Appalachia, and it's not people that are normally put on screen in Appalachia. It's a very diverse picture of it, and it's very political, and it makes some people mad, and that's all right. You had a question. Well, things mostly come to me in an Appalachian voice. However, my new novel is set in Ireland, but but the person who's in Ireland is originally from here. Although it's Appalachian Maine, and it's real complicated reasons why that is. So that would be my farthest away. But even when I am writing outside the region in that way, I still have my mentality is of Appalachia. And my novel, Southernmost, about half of that book is set in Key West, Florida. But again, it's a rural, working class preacher from rural Tennessee who has gone to Key West. And I have spent a lot of time in Nashville. I do a lot of anonymous writing in the music industry, and so I'm in Nashville a lot. And so that's why that book is set outside of Nashville. People ask me a lot why it's not set in Kentucky. That's why. So, I mean, I do want to write other things, but not with any kind of marketing angle. You know what I mean? It's just whatever comes to me, I'm going to write it. And right now, I'm trying to write a contemporary Appalachian retelling of Howard's End by M. Forster. So it's all about class and race. And also, I have a whole sequel to Clay's Quilt in my head if I ever can get to write it. So I want to write that. It's called Clay's Choice. I know everything that happens in it if I can just sit down and write it. A couple others? Yes. Oh, thank you. Hmm. Well, that's just based on my family. The major quilter in my family was a man who, his name, I showed a picture of him. His name was my Uncle Dave. In the book, he's Uncle Paul. His mother, he was raised by a single mother. His father died when he was very small, and she never remarried or anything. And she had 3 boys and 3 girls, and she insisted that they all know how to quilt. And one reason that she made the boys quilt was they had less to do in the wintertime outside, and she wanted them to be keeping busy, And so one way she kept them busy was quilting. And the quilts he made were much more utilitarian. They were quilts that would have been used for the horses or, in a barn, or they were, not incredibly decorative. The object, his main goal wasn't beauty. And I mean, I know that even the beautiful quilts were utilitarian, were used, but you know what I mean? It was all about warmth and things like that. But they're treasures, they're not like intricately made or anything like that, but I'm glad I have some of his quilts. Yes. My favorite song. Gosh, that's a hard question. I guess if I had to narrow it down, it would be Keep on the Sunny Side. Just because I love how on the surface it seems like a simple song, but it's a really complicated and complex song when you really get into it, you know. I saw another hand here. Yes. Hmm. I guess that, you know, I don't know about them, but I was taught to be as closed minded about the outside world as the outside world was taught to be about me. And so I would encourage them to just be open minded. And I mean, for instance, I was taught that everybody in New York was rude and awful and godless, you know, and things like that. So that'd be one thing. The other thing would be to not allow people to make fun of where you're from and your accent, and to do that in a diplomatic. You can do that in a diplomatic way, you know, to a point, and then to a point. After a point, I just lay my diplomacy down and, you know, give it right back to them. But I guess those would be the main two things. I saw a couple other hands. My first book was posted in 2001, but I've been writing since 7th grade. One more? Back here? I don't think so. If you can hang out a minute, I'll look at my iPad and give it to you exactly. Thank you all so much for being here. I'd love to talk to you more.
Well, that was wonderful. Let's give Mr. House a round of applause again. He'll be signing books for us after we get done with the presentation of our awards for the short story and poetry contest. And I think I'm going to go home, maybe you all will too, and just listen to myself say oil. I don't know, I'm really fascinated by that now. I didn't know that that was a thing, but apparently it is. So, oil. I don't know. It's my pleasure to welcome Paxton Allgaier to the stage. Paxton is going to help me present awards for this year's Lonesome Pine Short Story and Poetry Contest. And Paxton is a representative of the Lonesome Pine Heritage, say that, Arts and Crafts? Arts and Crafts, sorry, Lonesome Pine Arts and Crafts. I'll give you these. They should be in order. Okay. So, hopefully we'll have lots of our winners here today with us. In our middle school category, for the Lonesome Pine, the 33rd Annual Lonesome Pine Short Story Contest, I'd like to congratulate our third place winner, who is Layla Hamilton. Layla is a homeschool student, and she is recognized for her short story titled All in a Lifetime. Congratulations. Our second place winner is Olive Jeffrey, a student at Union Middle School, for her piece titled The Dreaming Champion. Congratulations, Olive. And our first place winner in the middle school category is Corey Gray. Corey is a student at Ridgeview Middle School, and his story was titled The Wrath, or The Wraith, I think. Okay, switch out. Who do you have next? third place winner in the high school category is Emily Caitlin May Hall, a student at Central High School, for her short story titled The Empress of Melatonia. Congratulations. Our second place winner in the high school category is Shelby Ann Peace for her work Like a Bat. Shelby is a student at Union High School. Congratulations. Our first place winner in the high school category is Claire Childress. Claire is a homeschool student, and her story was titled Celebrity Happiness. Congratulations. In our adult category, our third place winner is Kelly Pilkington of Norton for her work titled An Autonomous Fear. Nope. Our second place winner in the adult category is Greg Sturgill of Wise for his piece titled Red and Milky White. And our first place winner in the adult short story category is Donna Ratliff Kennedy for her work titled Sitting Up with the Dead. Congratulations to all of our short story winners. In our middle school poetry contest, our third place winner is Lauren Wood, a student at Ridgeview Middle School. Lauren is being recognized for her poem, Dear Shakespeare. Our second place winner in the middle school category is Rachel Mullins of Ridgeview Middle School. Rachel is being recognized for her poem titled Infinite Imagination. Congratulations to Rachel. Okay. And our first place winner in the middle school category is Kiera Hamilton, a homeschool student from Big Stone Gap, Virginia. Kiera is being recognized for her work titled Dreams Keep You Alive. In our high school poetry contest, our third place winner is Noah Smith, a homeschool student. Noah is being recognized for his work, The Men of Culloden. Our second place winner in the high school category is Ethan Roberts. Hope Ethan's here today. He is being recognized for his work titled Misspelled. And our first place winner in the high school category is Emily Caitlin May Hall at Central High School for her work In My Wildest Dreams. In our adult category for poetry, our third place winner is Donna Hamilton of Churchill, Tennessee, for her work, The Girl and the Red Balloon, or the Girl and the Balloon, sorry. Our second place winner in the adult category is Ebony Hamilton of Big Stone Gap for her work, A Deer in the Headlights. And our first place winner in the adult poetry contest is Mackenzie Templeton of Gate City for her work titled Snowflakes. let's give another round of applause for all of our short story and poetry contest winners. To me, I think it's about the most courageous thing you can do is to put your thoughts and hopes and dreams on a piece of paper and provide it to other people to read. It's scary and it takes a lot of courage, and you all are to be commended. Thank you. Thank you. So for all of our contest winners, we'd like to ask you, if you would, afterward, just to gather out by the fireplace there in the Slimp Commons area. We're going to take your picture, bring your certificate with you. And just wanted to mention, if you have a reservation for lunch at the Fox House and don't know how to get there, just come see me and I'll help direct you as best I can. Mr. House, of course, is going to stay a little bit longer. There's books available for sale from the Mountain Empire Community College bookstore if you'd like to have those signed by Mr. House. Again, we'd like to thank you all for coming today. This is a great crowd. We had a great speaker, and I appreciate you all so much for supporting cultural heritage in our region, and especially Mr. House. Thank you.